Hello everyone. Welcome to this tutorial on Python Basics. And this particular tutorial will actually discuss a little bit about variables and strings. So the basic agenda of this particular tutorial are understanding a variable, storing different sorts of values in a variable, understanding string, trivial operations on string, and how does Python handle memory allocations to variables. So what we're exactly going to do over here is we're going to start the interpreter and do most of our operations over here only. So first of all, let me define what is a variable. We often have to do lots of calculations in Python using programming logic and calculations. But often we have lots of inputs from the user or outputs which you have to show to the user. So for those purposes, if we have to store those inputs and outputs, we need to have a very basic unit which is actually called a variable. A variable is prevalent in mostly each and every programming language which are out there, be it C#, Java, C, or whatever. So Python also has it. And how can we define a variable? We actually have to give it a name. Let's say we give the name A and we input the value as 23. So here's the value 23 stored in a variable called A. So once I enter it, again, it actually brings the value whatever it had. Now I can use the print command to print this value. So once I print this A, it actually prints the value 23. We can store different sorts of values in a variable. Let's call it a variable called var A var1 and store a value called 45.674. This is a float value basically, so this is the value. Now, each and every variable is actually stored in the memory address. And that memory address, if you want to print it at any point, we can use the id function and provide it with a variable name and print it. So this is actually the memory address where this particular variable is stored in the computer memory. We need not go into all the details of the memory addresses and all. Just for the time being, you should know that if you ever want to print the memory address of any variable in Python, you can use this id function. So by default, actual memory addresses are in hexadecimal, and you can even use the hex function and provide it the memory address. And then it will print the hexadecimal equivalent of the memory address. Okay, this is it. So this was a very little explanation of what memory addresses are. We're going to deal with them later on in detail. So now let's move on to yet another variable called y2 and provide it a special value string 1. So this is basically a string. What a string is actually we can consider a string as a collection of individual characters, and obviously in programming languages, we have to operate on strings. And quite often we have huge frameworks to build just upon to calculate these strings and the collection of strings. So a string is a very important feature of any programming language, and as it is with Python. Once you have a string, there are lots of operations we can do in this particular string. So let's see what we can do over here. There are lots of functions. For example, see there's a function called lower. There's a complementary function called upper off for that function as well. So if we print our value of y2, it's actually string 1. But if we go ahead and try method upper, it will print the values in the uppercase. Now let's see if we want to split the string from I. So let's see what happens. We'll enter I, we hit enter. So as you can see that this string was string 1. And once we applied the method called split and provided the value I, it also searched for the I, and from that point it split the string into two parts. So this is pretty interesting. Now let's take yet another variable and store a sentence in it. Now as you can see, I entered a lot of white spaces in this particular string, and that was on purpose. We can use yet another method or function regarding strings, and that is called a strip. So once we use this method, as you can see, the white spaces are actually gone from the start and from the end. This is to clearly mention that this function doesn't remove the white spaces in between the characters if we manually print this without applying the script function. It actually prints the white spaces as well. So now what I would like you to do is to go ahead and store different sorts of variables and take strings of different sorts and store them and apply these functions on it. So that will give you a better understanding of variables. Now let's move on to how does the memory allocations of variables happen in Python. Each and every computer system has RAM. So what RAM does is it actually stores the running of programs in a system. Now this system has this RAM memory. And whenever you store any sort of variable, let's say var equals 4 equals, and this goes right into the RAM and occupies spaces over there. So if you want to actually see, you can open up another command prompt, execute the task list command, and over here you can see IPython, which is actually occupying 2 megabytes of space right now. So this was a very basic level of definition or explanation of how this memory allocation takes place. So be aware that whatever value you are storing, it actually goes to the RAM. So whenever in the future, if you'll be writing complex programs in Python, you have to be very careful about your variables, because if they occupy a lot of space, the program is going to be inefficient and slow down the system. So more on that later. If you have any queries regarding that, you might want to post it on our discussion forum. In our next tutorial, we're actually going to talk about numbers and different operators which we can apply on those numbers. So I think it was pretty easy to understand, and you'll be pretty excited for our next tutorial as well. See you in the next tutorial. Thank you. Have a nice day.